Okay, so this is the fourth and final part of Chapter 8, Backing Up Data and Applications, Steps to Take in Handling an Incident and Disaster Recovery. So first we'll talk about backing up data and applications. Recovery is possible only if the company has access to backups of data and applications. Plans must include dealing with backup storage media, location, and access. Tape backup is traditional choice for backup and, believe it or not, is still the most common. But restoration from tape is slow, and many systems have RTOs that are much shorter than tape restore time. These kind of sites often use disk-based solutions, such as a storage area network or network-attached storage, or even off-site network-based storage, such as remote journaling. There are different types of backups. A full backup backup copies. This backup copies everything to backup media. A differential backup. You start by making a full backup, perhaps on Sunday when traffic is the lightest. On Monday through Saturday, you back up changes made since Sunday's full backup on a daily basis. As the week progresses, each night's backup, the differential takes a little longer because Mondays is Mondays, but Tuesdays is Mondays plus Tuesdays, and Wednesdays is Mondays plus Tuesdays plus Wednesdays, so each one gets a little longer. Incremental backup, again, you start with a full backup when traffic is light. Then each night you back up only that day's changes. As the week progresses, the nightly incremental backup takes about the same amount of time because Mondays is just Mondays and Tuesdays is just Tuesdays and so forth. It's faster to create the incremental weekday backups than the differential ones, which is obvious. This comes at a price, however. If you need to use the backup images to restore data, systems using differential backups would need to restore only the full and the latest differential. Those using incremental would need to restore the full and then Monday's incremental and Tuesdays and Wednesdays and so forth. So you'd have to do like four restores for Wednesday if you failed and had to do this on a Thursday morning, for example. You should back up items other than just data. These include router and switch configurations, user access permissions and configurations, and server workstation operating systems and configurations. Okay, so let's talk about steps to take in handling an incident. When an incident occurs, an organization needs to respond. This process includes notification, response, recovery and follow-up, and documentation, and we'll talk about each of these. Notification is the first step in an incident response program is to determine whether an incident has even taken place. Not all events are incidents. You must find out whether the incident is serious or whether it is a common or benign occurrence. This is called triage, prioritizing the incident. The goal is to contain the incident and, if possible, improve the situation. Try not to make the situation worse. Find out whether the event is a false positive. You may receive the initial notification of an incident from an alarm, a complaint from a user, an alert from a security vendor, or log analysis. Now remember, a false positive is something that seems like it's an incident but is not. So response, once you identify it, the next phase is to limit the damage. The important aspect of this is containment. Many incidents grow and expand rapidly, possibly affecting other systems, departments, and even business partners. Incident response plan must outline what steps must be taken to stop the spread of the incident without causing unnecessary outage. It is absolutely essential to have a plan. The odds are slim of correctly guessing the best course of action in the middle of an incident. It is essential to identify the source and type of incident so that you can enact the proper recovery procedures. Let's talk about recovery, then follow-up and documentation. Recovery. After you've contained the incident and eliminated or blocked its source, it is time to recover. Deal with the exploited vulnerability so it doesn't happen again right away. Clean up any malicious content from the system to prevent reinfection. Follow-up. Learning from the incident will let management establish new procedures and controls to prevent or react to an incident more effectively in the future. Documentation. Document every step in the incident response process because it will be very valuable in helping respond to future incidents. Okay, let's talk about recovering from a disaster. A disaster recovery plan does three things. It establishes an Emergency Operations Center, EOC, which is an alternate location from which the BCP or BCP-DRP will be coordinated and implemented. It determines when the manager should declare an incident a disaster. The DRP enables you to make critical decisions ahead of time. Making critical decisions ahead of time allows you to manage and review decisions without the urgency of an actual disaster. DRPs are long-term, time-consuming, and expensive projects. The process starts with a business analysis. It identifies critical functions and their maximum tolerable downtimes. The primary steps to disaster recovery, there are three of these in the order of importance. The most important thing, no matter what, is to ensure the safety of the individuals working for your organization. When Hurricane Floyd came to or was approaching Savannah, and I was working for Savannah Foods and Industries, Dixie Crystal Sugar, the first thing we were told we had to do after we evacuated Savannah was to report back where we were so that they could contact us. But the first thing they wanted to know was that we had evacuated. So ensuring the safety of the individuals was the primary step in disaster recovery. Then you must contain the damage. Once you've done that, you must assess the damage and begin recovery operations according to the disaster recovery plan and the business continuity plan. Activating it. Recovery process involves two main phases. Restore the business operations. In many cases, the recovery may be at an alternate site. At Savannah Foods, we had leased what really amounts to a warm site at IBM in Atlanta that we would go up to every year and practice at. One of our problems, though, was, and I may have discussed this in a previous chapter, we're talking about hot and warm and cold sites, but one of our problems when Hurricane Floyd approached was that so many companies in Florida had already leased their location in Atlanta with IBM, their space. And at that time, we had gone through the process of being bought by Imperial Sugar. When that went through, the contract with IBM had lapsed, and it was only discovered at the last minute that nobody had paid it. And so what had to happen was our manager, who took all the software and the data with her, had to take it to IBM Center in Chicago. And so, being at an alternate site, by the time she got to Chicago, she was told that Floyd was not coming to Savannah and that she had to fly back, but an alternate site. And our data would have been running at an alternate site. In that case, it would have been running somewhere in Chicago instead of Atlanta like planned. Return operations to its original state before the disaster. To return to normal operations, you must rebuild the primary site. In this phase, you must also activate salvage and repair teams. Of course, this is in case your site has actually been destroyed or damaged. Fortunately, when Hurricane Floyd, we did have winds here, but there were no damages and such. Hurricane Matthew, when it came through Savannah, I actually had some leakage in my window in my office here in the Science Center, and documents, they probably weren't that important, but they were on the credenza behind me actually got wet. But again, very little, or if anything, was damaged on the Armstrong campus. And at that time, we still had not even merged with consolidated with Georgia Southern. I don't think anything happened up there either. Operating a reduced modified environment. You must adapt quickly to ensure the secure operation of systems, including backups and reconciliation of errors. Some points to keep in mind. You may want to suspend normal processes such as separation of duties or spending limits. Here you may want to compensate with additional controls or by additional auditing. If a number of systems are down, users might need more tech support or guidance on how to use alternate systems or access. Here, the business impact analysis should have identified the minimum recovery resources as part of the recovery need. During a disaster and recovery, it might be good to combine services that were on different hardware platforms onto common servers. While running at the alternate site, you must continue to make backups of data and systems. Okay, restoring damaged systems. You must plan for rebuilding damaged systems. You need to know where to get configuration charts, inventory lists, and backup applications and data. Some points to keep in mind. Once rebuilding starts, the administrator must make sure to update the operating systems and applications for the most current patches. After you rebuild the system, you must restore the data to the RPO. This includes reconciling books and records. Ensure that the operating systems and applications are current and secure. You must activate the access control rules, directories, and remote access systems to permit users to get onto the new system. When we had to restore our system at Great Dane Trailers after the flood of October 1994, we had to do all these steps. The IBM AS400 that I worked on was out of commission for a week. We had to reactivate all the access control rules and directories that had to be done. We had to restore all the data. One of the things that had to be done was we had to go lease a new mainframe computer, IBM 3083, because ours got totally destroyed. Well, the data and programs were not, but the machine was. And that took 3 weeks, not 1 week. And then we had to go through the whole process with that machine. Once we got it shipped from Memphis, where we found it, to Savannah, and the room had already been cleaned out and everything, and all the water had been removed, all the trash and everything that was in there had been removed. The operating system had to be loaded, the applications had to be loaded, all the current patches had to be placed and they're up to date. I mean, that really did have to happen. We had to go back and figure out where the data was last time it was actually accessed and load it from there. So all this had to be done. I mean, it's not something that's just an academic exercise on a PowerPoint slide. This took, for the IBM AS400 mid-range computer, probably took, we got back running on a week, and then it took like 2 or 3 days, very resilient machine, to get that sucker running properly. Once the mainframe was acquired and put in place, it took about another full week of loading data and loading the operating systems and the applications to get it into position to be used. Okay, some disaster recovery issues that are often overlooked in the maintenance and execution of one of these. Generators. Ensure all fuel is fresh and contracts are in place to guarantee a supply of fuel in a crisis. That's crucial. You run out of fuel, you're not going to be able to power the site. Safety of the damaged site. Protect it from damage or looting. In the flood of 94, that was kind of easy to do. We had like 8 feet of water in our backyard, basically, at Great Dane Trailers over there on Lathrop Avenue. But nonetheless, you want to make sure that there is security there. The water had to go somewhere, eventually left. And, you know, the 54, 53-foot trailers that had been floating, literally, landed. And so you need to make sure that the safety of the damaged site is intact. Reentry. Examine the damaged site using people qualified to determine if it's safe for employees to reenter. We were told we were let out on a Wednesday. We came back on the following Monday. And even then, the people in the factory, I think, were not allowed back for several more days because they had to certify that the place was safe. I mean, you turn on the electricity and somebody could have gotten electrocuted if it was still wet and not grounded properly. So all that had to be inspected after the flood and the water went away in order to determine that the factory was usable. Transportation of equipment and backup, safe transportation from the alternate site. Now, again, in that case, we did not use an alternate site. But the transportation of the new mid-range mainframe computer from Memphis to Savannah had to be done. And of course, that was the leasing company's responsibility. But nonetheless, it still had to be done. Communications networks, regular telephone service, you might need an alternate form of communication, especially among key team members. And in today's world with smartphones, that's not hard to do. Recovery alternatives. Business continuity coordinator considers each alternative's ability to support critical business functions, its operational readiness compared with the RTO, and the associated costs. 3 choices usually are considered if a business or part of it has to be moved for recovery. A dedicated site operated by the business, such as a secondary processing center. A commercially leased facility, such as a hot site or mobile facility. An agreement with internal or external facility. External commercial providers offers services to many organizations. This means that if there's a disaster, it could affect many customers of a commercial provider. What priority will you have if this happens? Again, going back to the IBM warm site situation with Hurricane Floyd at Savannah Foods in 1999, um, the priority we had with IBM in Atlanta was all of a sudden we had no priority because we hadn't paid the bill. So once we paid it and the contract was signed again, we discovered that in an emergency situation, we had lost our priority for Atlanta and our manager had to go to Chicago. So those kind of things don't happen that often where you don't have your contract renewed. But the fact of the matter is that the priority you're going to get might be lower than you think if you don't keep up with contact with your alternate site provider. Make sure the specs for workspace security requirements, IT, and telecommunications are suitable for your critical business functions, and ensure that suitable accommodations are available for staff, including facilities for resting, showering, and catering. Now, Savannah Foods was going to do at that time for the executives was the alternative accommodation for them. We all evacuated to like friends and relatives' homes. Um, Although many probably went to hotels. But the key executives were going on the corner of I-16 and US 441 in Dublin, which is exit like 51, 52, somewhere in there, exit 51, I think. It's now a Holiday Inn Express. They weren't any smarter because of that. It's just a joke. But it used to just be a plain Holiday Inn. And back then, um, yeah, we had a contract and our executives were going to run the business out of there. That's where they were going to go. The president, the vice presidents and so forth. We had actually rooms reserved at that place. That is one thing that actually happened. They did go there. It wasn't a situation where they were booted out or anything like that. The contract was there and it was actually executed. Interim or alternate processing strategies. Here are the most common recovery location options. Alternate processing center or mirrored site is always ready and under the organization's control. It's the most expensive option because it requires fully redundant um, or duplicate operations and synchronized data. Um, the organization has to operate it continually, so it costs a fortune. Its additional costs must be justified by business needs, such as having a duplicate support staff. Something like that would be more applicable to national defense industries or governmental agencies, maybe the NSA, the Department of Defense, things like that. Hot site can take over operations quickly. It has all the equipment and data already staged at that location, though you may need to refresh or update the data. There are two kinds. One is company owned and dedicated, which is expensive. The other is commercially leased, which was similar to what we had with IBM. The advantage is that it can provide alternate computing facilities quickly, allowing rapid recovery. An internally owned hot site is much more expensive than a commercial one, but no one else will be competing for it during a regional disaster. A warm site, this is what we really have with IBM. Common IT, communications, power, and HVAC, but you have to purchase and deliver IT equipment such as servers and communications. Um, ours probably was a mix between a hot and a warm because the machines were there. We didn't have to deliver the IBM AS400. It was there, but we had to load our operating system and all of our data. In a hot site that you actually control, all that's already there. We did have to load the data. We had to load the um, operating system or the version that we had. Obviously an IBM AS400 is going to come with its version of OS 400, but we had to make sure that it was updated to the version that we were using, um, uh, or at the version that we were using. I'm not sure we were using the most current at that time. I couldn't vouch for that. You have to retrieve and load the data as well, and that's important because we definitely had to do that when we would go and practice it. Cold site, empty data center with HVAC and power, nothing else, least expensive option, but it requires a lot of time to get up and running because you have to purchase, deliver, and configure all the equipment in telecom. Some organizations begin recovery in a hot site and transfer over to a warm or cold site if the interruption lasts a long time. But what I would have to say at Savannah Foods, Imperial Sugar, ours was like a cross between a hot and a warm site. Um, it just depends on the contract you have with the organization that you're dealing with. Um, as to what you could classify it as. Other arrangements, processing agreements. You can find an organization with similar IT configurations and backup technologies. You can forge an agreement with the other organization to provide support if your company encounters a disaster. Um, a good example of that is, we did talk with, I believe, before they were joined with Candler General Hospital, we talked with St. Joseph's at Great Dane because we both had IBM AS400s, but obviously the two businesses are quite different. Nonetheless, a machine's a machine, and we did talk about using theirs, and I don't know what, obviously, that I don't think anything came of it. The flood of '94, we didn't go use theirs for our IBM AS400, but I know that discussions were made with them. Reciprocal or mutual aid, your organization may enter a reciprocal agreement, also known as mutual aid or consortium agreement with a company that has similar technology. So again, it's kind of similar to processing agreement, but it's I'll help you, you'll help me. In this agreement, a number of companies agree to support each other. You must carefully consider this approach. For example, can each organization continue its primary business while supporting another? Can the equipment and infrastructure support both organizations? You must do tests to confirm that all systems can handle the extra load and that they are compatible. You need to also consider the sensitivity of your data being processed on somebody else's machines. That's something you really do have to think about. Reciprocal centers involve business do the same type of work but are not direct competitors. These might include crosstown hospitals or a paperback publisher paired with a hardcover publisher. So here you'd have a situation where, like in Savannah Memorial Medical Center and the Candler St. Joe system, but they'd have to have the similar type of machine to make it into a reciprocal center. Contingency might contract for contingency carriers or contingent suppliers if its primary supply method fails. Consider maintenance fees and activation time. And lastly, the service bureau, a service provider that has extra capacity. An example is a call center that handles incoming calls, but it raises the same concerns as a reciprocal arrangement. So you have to think about, because you're dealing with somebody else's data on your machine, and that there are security situations involved with that. And the cloud. Since cloud computing is based on virtualization, it's easy to copy an entire server image from place to place, and a lot of companies, more than you can count probably, are going to the cloud to handle their backup in any kind of an actual emergency. And that's it, the summary of Chapter 8. You can protect data and business functions with a business continuity plan, disaster recovery plan, business impact analysis and incident response plan, and risk assessments include quantitative and qualitative approaches, and that ends Chapter